Thank you very much. We're starting bang on 6:15 because we've come after another event that some people might have been in before. So some quick introductions. My name's Adam Bedford and I'm chairing this session because in my spare time, when I'm working normally I work for Ferris Science in York, but in my spare time I run Fieldwork Book Club, which is what we're doing here for the second year at Oxford. So a bit of background on Fieldwork Book Club. Somebody said to me on the way in, I booked in but I haven't read the books. Don't worry about it. It's an easygoing book club, you don't need to worry about that. So we've been reading books for the past 3 years, including the 2 books that we're going to talk about this evening. But we're doing it in person because we're doing it all online. So the session will be filmed, so that's good. So we want to get some good questions going. But I'm going to be asking questions, introductions in a minute. But I want some questions from you. And there's nothing worse if anybody has chaired sessions before in looking out and seeing no hands. So if you could please have a question prepared, otherwise I've got to keep talking. I do a funny thing with my neck if I think the question's going on for too long and I get a little bit stressed. So if Julie Robinson's on the front, if she sees my neck do a funny thing, that means I'd like you to make your question a bit shorter. So we've got plenty of time for answers. I've got my things here like Family Fortunes, some messages from Abby. So I've done the welcome, I'm about to introduce people, and at the end we've got a small shop. So if you haven't bought the book, you should come and buy it. And I think we're doing cash only or bank transfers. Yeah. If you've got a checkbook, if you're a farmer and you brought a checkbook,
I'm all right with
let's go for it. So anyway, we're here because we want to talk about Anna Jones's book, Divide, and Rebecca Smith's book, Rural. So first of all, how are you both?
Good, very good.
Nice to see you. So how we're going to run it is we're going to do a couple of short readings to set the scene for the 2 books. Some people in the room will have read it, I'm sure, but other people won't have. So Anna, do you want to just give us a little précis about your book, maybe a little introduction to how the book came about, and then we'll do a reading, and then we'll get into some questions.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for coming to this session. My name's Anna, and my book is called Divide, the Relationship Crisis Between Town and Country. And as I'm speaking to a farming audience, you probably already know a bit about that relationship crisis and the impacts that it can have on the jobs and the way of life that people in the countryside and farming. But the book is part journalistic, part memoir. So I'm a farmer's daughter from a small upland beef and sheep farm on the Welsh borders near Oswestry. And my family have always farmed. For as far back as I could do the family tree on both sides, my mum's side and my dad's side, we've never left the Oswestry, mid-Wales area. And I did find a bit of inbreeding in there, unfortunately. The great-grandparents were first cousins, but we'll brush over that. So that's very much my family background, my cultural background, and what my identity is. I very strongly feel that identity as a country girl and a farmer's daughter. But I knew from a young age I wanted to be a journalist, and I went off to university in Preston when I was 18, and then that took me into a career at the BBC. So I went to live in Birmingham, then in Manchester, and then in Bristol. And when I first moved to the city, I felt like I'd landed on a different planet. And the book is about that feeling of being slightly alien, not quite fitting in, but it's also a book about how living in the city for over 15 years changed me. And going back to that rural culture, it was almost like a bit of a door had clicked shut behind me, and I felt like I wasn't as much part of the tribe as I used to be, and that hurt me deeply. And I felt the book really helped me figure out what that identity was. A little bit urban, a little bit rural. And then the book also looks at the subjects and the debates and the divisions that cause it, that the urban-rural divide feeds into, from the environment, animal welfare, food, politics. So I'm just going to read you the prologue. It's only a page, so it won't be too long, but this just sets up what the book is. As a child growing up in the 1990s, I dreamed of leaving the countryside and moving to New York City. In fact, I became quite obsessed with the idea. I'd watched a movie on TV about a high-flying career woman played by Diane Keaton, who strides around Manhattan in a pencil skirt and heels. I got so swept up in the fantasy that I'd wear mum's stilettos, stuffed with socks to stop them falling off my feet, and march around the garden with her handbag slung over my shoulder. I couldn't quite conjure the thrill of Madison Avenue on the lawn, so I'd pick my way across the field, past the tractor, feed troughs, and our blind old sheepdog, Jaff's kennel, and stomp around outside the cowshed. The shoes made a better clip-clopping sound on the concrete by the muck heap. I fantasized about city life throughout my teenage years. At the age of 18, I left our small beef and sheep farm on the border between England and Wales to study journalism at the University of Central Lancashire. I remember walking down Fishergate in Preston, feeling like I'd made it to Manhattan, just like Diane Keaton. It didn't matter to me that it was a town in the north of England. All I wanted were people, crowds, traffic, bustle, and noise. I felt a thrill at the sound of sirens. This was the urban life I'd dreamed of. The great irony, which has only just occurred to me, is that Diane Keaton's character in the 1987 romantic comedy Baby Boom ends up leaving New York and moving to a farmhouse in Vermont. By my early 30s, the novelty of city living had well and truly worn off for me too. I'd moved to Birmingham, then Manchester and Bristol, building my career at the BBC, though always avoiding London as one step too deep into the urban jungle. And by the time I'd racked up 21 different addresses, something deep inside was calling me home. Back to my roots on the Welsh borders, back to the farm. Sadly, real life is more complicated than shoving your belongings in an old Volvo and moving to Vermont. The road back to rural life is fraught with obstacles. What would I do for work? Could I commute? Where would I live? And most profoundly of all, would I fit in? I'm not the person I once was. I am urbanized, used to convenience, used to choosing from endless options, used to living and thinking a certain way. I have a life that is different in almost every way to my conservative, rural, working-class upbringing. I am no longer part of the community I grew up in. Could I ever truly belong again? Can a townie ever go back to being a country dweller? Only when I started pondering these questions did the barriers between my urban and rural life and the conflict between my urban and rural self reveal themselves. They were subtle and opaque, difficult to grasp and articulate, and so easy to overlook and ignore. But they are real, and the more I looked, the sadder I felt. I'd uncovered a hidden, chasmic divide, and once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it.
Thank you very much. Let's do the same, Rebecca. Tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll have a reading from your book.
Okay. Well, in quite a weirdly parallel way, I grew up in a similar way, but I'm the daughter of a forester. So I'm not from farming background. We grew up very much alongside farms, but I didn't really know how they ran or anything like that. We were foresters, and I grew up in the Lake District in Cumbria. And I was keen to explore. That's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to get out and explore the world. And but I loved where I was from, and I knew that. I knew I didn't want to go too far. And a little bit like you as well, I studied English film and media at Stirling University because it had that rural kind of feel to it. I didn't want to go to anywhere more city-like than that, because I felt like I very much didn't fit in. I didn't like the sirens or anything like that. I wanted to be half rural, half not. And yeah, I worked for BBC for a little bit, working in radio, and then I had children, and then I left work and started writing. And it was only when I started writing that everything kind of fit together for me. I wanted to write about tied housing because I grew up like that. Dad was a forester. We lived on an estate in Cumbria, and I had never read anything about this before. And I thought, well, actually, there's a lot more industries, rural industries that have or had tied housing, and the more I explored that, the more I researched that, the more I thought, well, there's something in this. And it just I kind of cobbled it all together. I didn't expect it to be a book. It just kind of happened because there was so much life in that. There was so much history, but also current life in that. And yeah, that's what I came up with. So I'm going to read from chapter 2 called Wood, because obviously foresters and things like that, it just makes sense. It is autumn and we are scattered about the wood my brother lives in. We do not know it yet, but this will be the last time in months we are all together. The next time we meet, the pandemic will have eased for a second time. I'll be a few months pregnant in the throes of morning sickness, and Leslie, my brother's girlfriend, will once again be having regular chemotherapy. But today it is perfect. The air is cool and fresh, and we are helping Tom clear a beech tree he has felled. It lies across a small spring, covering it entirely with a mass of branches, and we are tasked with dragging the branches up and away to clear the beck. He has been digging out the normally boggy area, encouraging the spring to run clearly, and using the clay for plastering the walls inside his cabin. There are now plants and herbs growing on the banking, and he is hoping for tadpoles in the future. I often tell people my brother lives in the woods, but it always sounds a little odd, almost too fairy tale-like. So much so that sometimes Mum holds back on telling people what he does, as they don't quite believe it. He spends most of the year in a small patch of woodland in Cumbria near Bowth, in a similar way to how coppice workers and charcoal burners lived over 100 years ago. Like them, Tom spends the warmer seasons within the trees, hoping to stretch it out as long as the weather will allow. He stays at Leslie's house across the country in Gateshead when he needs to, and sometimes, when he really needs to, he goes to Mum and Dad's house a few miles away for a bath. He makes a living from the forest around him, managing the woodland, encouraging diversity in the species. He's not what you would call a forester, an ecologist, or an environmentalist, but sits somewhere in between all these things. He understands how a forest works, so when he fells a tree, he ensures the cut will allow more sunlight onto the forest floor for plants to flourish. Then he will use a chainsaw to carve the trunk of it into a hare, a horse, or a bear. He sells these online and at country shows. My son Ellis usually loves to help him mine the muddy clay, but today he is chopping the branches off a tree with an axe, watched closely by Tom. He is 11, and the idea of working what can only be described as dangerous tools appeals to him. Mum, Jessie and I are dragging the branches, piling them up into a makeshift wall to provide habitat for beasties, as well as creating a natural screen to camouflage the area from any walkers that happen to pass. Not that many do. Leave it there.
Thank you. I've got a question for you first, but I'll give you some preamble. I want to ask Rebecca a question. One of the things that we've been running the book club for 3 years, and I interviewed one author, and he said this and just happened to be this type of person, but I asked him a question about nature writing and all this stuff going on. And he said, well, so much of nature writing now is a white middle-class bloke goes for a walk and then writes a book about it. And he said that, and he was that man who said that. So when your book came out about the lives of the working class countryside, I wanted to read it in the book club because I thought, I don't feel like I've ever read any of this before. And there's a huge number of people in the countryside that are just from a working class background. So one of the things, Rebecca, you say in the book is you talk about going on a shoot later in life after your childhood, and you feel like you're accepted, but you feel like you've got what you term class ambiguity that maybe came from your father because he had a foot in both camps. He described sort of a foot in both fields with the owners and the workers. And I just wondered, and maybe you as well, Anna, how you've reflected on that since, and how does that make you feel? You know, what about even accent? I feel that with my accent sometimes, how do you fit in? And I don't know, in your travels when you were writing the book, did you reflect on that even further?
Yeah, you feel like you don't kind of fit in anywhere. It's a bit of an odd one. You know, obviously an estate, they used to have shoots, so I went beating once or twice when I was a kid and I hated it. It just felt so odd, and which the part Adam's referring to, because I didn't like the idea that it was for other people's fun. And it wasn't really the shooting I felt uncomfortable about. It was like, I don't really like doing this for someone else. But then when I was older, an adult, a boss invited me onto a shoot to shoot. And it was so odd because I was in the Range Rovers, you know, and we all had the port, and, you know, it was very fancy. And I was watching the beaters go off, and I was like, I don't feel like I fit in here either. But because we lived on the estate, and I think you kind of learn to grow up like that a little bit. You know, you learn to, you're able to speak to lots of different types of people. But also, I wanted to write this because I think when you say you're from either the Lake District or you're from the countryside, people assume you are posh. And I wasn't, because we didn't own anything. You know, we always just rented stuff, and you know, it was we never went on big holidays or anything like that. It's just we weren't posh, but because people thought you were from the Lake District, or people got money there. It's like, well, yeah, some people do, but you know, there's a lot of people that actually work there and work in the shops as well as in, you know, in the farms and things like that, and all sorts. So I kind of wanted to give that, you know, show that angle of it, really.
I think when you're talking about that as well, it's why we've chosen these two books for this session, because one of the things I wanted to ask you, Anna, was in the jacket of the book, it talks about that the rural-urban divide is one of the least talked about cultural divides in the country, really. And I remember back in 2000, things like the fuel blockades, the countryside march, and that felt like we were really divided then between town and country. And do you think we've moved on? Has it got better? We feel like quite a divided country now.
Yeah, we do. It's different though, isn't it, now, than it was then? I don't know.
I don't know. Do you think it is?
I think it is, yeah. It's more subtle than that sort of very visual division. So just going back to what you were saying, one of the things that you noticed about my book is that my family are conservative, and your family would never dream of voting Conservative. Yet we're both working class.
Yeah.
And this was probably where I first noticed the divide, because my family are old school working class in the sense of very deferential to the upper classes, to perception, to the landowner. Even though we've got a small farm and my dad owns a few acres, it was quite deferential to people, you know, the posh people at the church and things. And it was like my nan was very much like Church of England, conservative. It was the kind of Benjamin Disraeli style conservatism who said the working classes are inherently conservative. I think the direct quote is something like, no group of people is more invested in preserving the institutions of the country than the working class. So I think my family fit more into that. And so I never even questioned it growing up. Never even questioned it for a minute. We didn't have much money, but my whole family voted Conservative. And when I moved to Birmingham, I remember I'd never really discussed politics before because everyone was the same where I came from. And I remember living in this shared house in Cape Hill, you know, very multicultural, quite economically deprived, but very vibrant part of the city. And it was a massive cultural experience for me moving there. And yeah, and it was all these political debates going on. And then I suddenly realized what conservative people were viewed as from an urban perspective. And it wasn't flattering. And my family people like my family were swivel-eyed, backward, privileged, selfish, all sorts of stuff. And I'd never come across it before. And I remember trying to defend where I came from, and it all came out wrong. I didn't have the language or the experience to defend what I felt was under attack. And I just ended up coming across really stupid and right-wing. And I used to go up to my room and I'd cry because I felt so other and didn't fit in at all. And all of my new friends in the city were urban working class and, you know, parents in unions, and knew much more that side of the experience. So I think for me, the perception that you're rich and you're privileged and you're posh has been really damaging, actually. And I think a lot of people in the countryside might feel that and feel fundamentally misunderstood from the urban perspective. So I write a lot about that in the book. So I think the divide is often much more subtle about how we feel and our identity than, oh, they're out there with placards trying to defend hunting and want hunting back. So it's...
One of the things you talk about, I almost don't want to spoil it for the book when everybody comes and buys the book at the end. But one bit you talk about when you go to the US, you meet a farmer there who says that you ask how he thinks people are viewed in his area. and he says that they're the flyover state. No one knows or cares we're out here. We're nothing, and yet we're everything. And I recognise that working with farmers in this country, that they feel like nobody gets them.
Yeah.
I suppose my question back to you is, because you've written a book from both sides, is what do you think a country person thinks of someone in town?
That they have an easier life, that they work a 9-to-5 job and have weekends off and spend all their time washing their cars and going shopping and having nice days out in the countryside. I honestly think that there can be quite a snobbery from the rural side about how easy life is in the city. And because they see day trippers coming out and they're like, oh, getting in the way of our work, moaning about us, our tractors and that kind of thing. So I think it can be quite, it's the divide the other way. This is not a book always painting farmers and country people as the good guys. Believe me, there's a lot of tough love in it as well. And I think farmers, I say farmers because it's the world I know, so you write from your own experience, are very quick to paint themselves as the victim a lot of the time in the way that they feel they are portrayed in the media or feel that the public view them. But sometimes there can be a bit of empathy lacking the other way, and not even a curiosity about trying to understand life in the city. The amount of times I have conversations and I say to farmers, well, have you ever been to London? No, what would I go to London for? Why would I want to go to bloody London? And it's like, well, you're talking about a life you know nothing about. If you only ever go to the Royal Welsh Show on your holiday, that's great. I love the Royal Welsh. Don't stop going to the Royal Welsh.
Those are kind of all-knowing laughs, weren't they?
There's a duty. You can't moan about how people view your life without making some effort to understand life on the other side of the tracks. And that's probably the fundamental message in my book.
I wonder if, in your book, Rebecca, whether there is some, if you like, shared experience between the urban and the countryside, because in many ways your book is a book about housing.
Yeah.
And if you think about the big political issues facing the country, really, you probably would put housing on there, access to it, cost of it, etc. And give us some examples from your book about the housing issues that came up, because I felt if you were to turn over the back of the book, it's a book about the countryside, but in many ways it could be, if there was a section on housing in a bookshop, it could also be put there as well, which is why I found it so interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we knew where to put it really, but because it's about the tied housing, and when I first started writing the book, I thought tied housing was a bad thing. Obviously it's in Scotland we'll say a sugary peg, because I live in Scotland now, everything could fall down basically. You could lose your job and your house, everything, for your family. In the old days, within a few days, and then you have to get kicked out. But that did kind of happen to us. But our landowners were okay, and that's also one of the things I want to do with my book, like Anna did with hers, is I didn't ever want to say this is bad, this is good. It's so much more nuanced than that, and I could see it from lots of different sides. I don't know if it's just the way I was brought up or what, but I just could, and so I tried to get that across. But by the end of it, after speaking to, it goes historically, it looks back at coal miners and slate miners and mill workers, because weirdly enough, when I started researching, all my family worked in all of those industries. Yeah. We were never really farmers, but we worked in all of those different things, dam builders, reservoir builders. And so it was like a transient lifestyle, setting up and building that reservoir here for 3 years with your family, then moving on to the next reservoir or railway or whatever. And so that, historically, that's where it came from. And then, but now, you've got tourism, which still has tied housing, farming, estates still have it. Breweries and distilleries still have some, well, maybe not breweries, but it's so difficult to buy a house in the countryside now. And this is where I am. I'm living in suburbs, and I don't really like it. I've been there for a long time now, and I'm so ready to move. I am just ready to go back where you probably were a few years ago. But it is so difficult to find anywhere.
Oh God, it's impossible. I rent, I can't afford to buy.
I know. Well, renting is almost as expensive in some ways. It's just mad. And then I started to think about tied housing. Well, actually, that makes sense to a lot of people. And there is people in Aviemore and in lots of places in Scotland, actually, and maybe some in England that are actually doing that. You know, businesses are providing houses now. And hopefully there will be more kind of, you know, rules against kicking them out, and you've got 2 days, that kind of thing, like we used to do in the old days. But it still feels like a bit of a sugary peg. But at least you are able to live in a beautiful place and, you know, bring your children up or whatever in somewhere where you feel at home, because that's what I'm missing. I don't feel at home where I am anymore. So I like Scotland, but I'm the central belt and it's very populated, and
too many folk. That's what they say around where I live.
and it's just, I miss the trees and I miss the fields, and there is something about you. We were talking about a sense of place earlier, and I didn't know I was missing that until, you know, I left it. And I'm desperate to find that sense of place again, because we didn't really own anything as well. It's difficult, you know. It must be so lovely to go back to the place where you.
Oh, I never even knew I needed it that much until I did it, and it was only thanks to the pandemic, because I haven't changed my job. It's the context has changed to allow more working from home, so I'm doing the same job I did in Bristol in Shrewsbury, which isn't rural, but it's only half an hour away from the farm, and even though it's a town, Shropshire's such a rural agricultural county. Even in the town, you feel it as a culture, and it's just so nice.
I want to ask some questions of the audience in a minute, so please don't make me pick on you. Please think of some questions. But I've got one for you. So Anna, you've gone back, and you want to go back. So what are people going to say about you when you come back, both of you? They're like, oh, here we go. Here's somebody coming back. Because in the book, in your book, Anna, you talk about somebody goes to farm in Wales, a guy called John, who possesses what you call 2 qualities which have helped him fit in. He's self-deprecating and a doer.
Yeah.
Because nobody likes to show off in the countryside.
No. Can't bear a bragger.
So what are people going to say to you when you move into the countryside? No doubt it will happen. What will they say?
I'd hate to get called an incomer.
You'd hate to be called.
Oh God, if someone called me an incomer or a blow-in, that would just be like a dagger to my heart. Oh God.
I think I'd be all right with it, because I've always been new to somewhere.
Oh yes, because you moved around.
Yeah, and my family's always moved around, so I think I'd be fine with that, because you just, you have to be there a long time, but you do learn to love it. It's a place, like I was talking to someone and she was saying, the rocks are the same here, and so I feel at home here. So geology comes into it, and history, which I thought was really interesting. And if the trees are similar as well, you've got, I don't know whether it's a broadleaves or whatever, you've just got something which makes you feel at home. But I was worried that because I don't live rurally, and the book's called Rural, that, I'm such a fraud. I can't write about this. But my mum said, and it's true, you wouldn't write about it if you still lived in that environment. If you still lived even in a tied house or in a rural area, you wouldn't know there was something to write about. You would just be in it and living it. And because I'm looking at it from the outside and I've lived inside, she said that's why you get a perspective of it. And she says, you're not a fraud, so thanks, Mum.
I would say, actually, I think maybe we're too rooted in my family, because we've never left and we've always been there. It's a curse as well as a blessing, because you're too invested in a place and you place too much value on anything. It's probably not healthy, and too much sentimental value, I mean. And recently, my sister and I went for a walk in the area around us, and we were coming back down, and we looked at the map, and there was 2 paths. One went that way and one went that way behind some houses, and it just looked like a track. So we started walking up there, and we heard this, hey, that's not a public footpath. And I was like, oh God. And he said, public footpath's down there. So anyway, we did as we were told, and I said, oh, ever so sorry, we always thought this was a track. And he looked at us and he went, well, you live around here then? And I said, yeah, we're Tony and Avril's daughters, they farm on the top. Oh, I know your dad. Comes past here in a grey pickup. Yeah, that's him. Yeah, I know your dad, known him years. Well, you're all right then, you can go on that path. And I was like, that local passport, just bang.
Local passport.
Yeah, and it opens doors and it removes barriers, and it just shows you how much of a barrier is there And unless you know the right people or you know the right area or whatever, it's very difficult to get over it. And so I suppose if I can do anything with the book and the work that I do, it's to try and help people overcome some of those barriers which are up here. They're not real, they're imagined, and to help us kind of be a little bit more welcoming, I suppose, and understanding and empathetic, whichever side of the fence you live on.
I want to come back to that, but I'd like to... Whoa!
Whoa, that's what we like.
I was looking straight through there to the lady with glasses on and the bluey coloured top. There's some microphones coming around.
Thank you very much. It's been fascinating listening to both of you talking about your experience, because I have the exact opposite experience. As you can probably tell, I'm Scottish, and I grew up, if you've ever seen the Train Spotting film, I grew up in that Leith in the 1970s. My granny's name was actually Renton as well, so So that's kind of where I grew up, and I now am a farmer. We feel most privileged to own 7 acres. Woo! And actually, that's if you divide the population of Scotland by the land area, that's actually, for me and my husband, that's like 3.45 acres each. That's kind of how much we're allotted. And I have the exact opposite experience from you, coming from an urban environment into a rural community. And I can see the exact parallels of exactly what you've both talked about in reverse. And I just wondered, I guess 2 points, one question, but one other point was, I don't know if anybody in the room has ever done their history, it's just like mind-bogglingly obsessive once you get into it. But I went to look for my great-grandfather's farm where he worked as a farm labourer. And we found it, and it was like a tiny wee cottage, and we found his grave, his unmarked grave in the graveyard in this tiny wee village, which is not a million miles from where our farm is now. And actually I just wanted maybe everybody in the room to just consider that actually most people were not urban even like 3 generations ago.
Absolutely.
So actually and I guess it's not until you see the urban to rural perspective that you might not see the enormous privilege that people have of growing up and living and owning land in the countryside. And for most people in urban settings, they don't have the opportunity to even remotely dream about that lifestyle. I feel enormously privileged that we now own land, but I feel the responsibility and I feel the privilege because I've not had it before.
Yeah.
And maybe the question then is, how do you think both of our experiences could be highlighted, or how do we use that experience to share that understanding in both directions about what the countryside does, but also the privilege of having that lifestyle is just enormous. And I think...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Go first. I've got some thoughts as well. But
one, I'm wary of painting living in the countryside as just a blanket privilege, because there is a lot of hidden poverty in the countryside, and there are social issues that are not as easy to tackle in the countryside because they're not as apparent in the statistics compared to urban areas where social problems tend to be more clustered, therefore easier to identify, therefore easier to tackle. So I don't always, and I don't want to paint the countryside as privileged in comparison to the city, and I don't want to paint the city as privileged in comparison to the countryside. But you're absolutely right, for most of us who are lucky enough to grow up in safe homes where we were fed and had security and warmth, absolutely, what a privilege to live in the countryside. And I think there is growing awareness of it with charities like the Country Trust, which our family farm is working with. And we're bringing kids out from schools not so far away, more like Flintshire, Cheshire, Ellesmere, Port, Wrexham, schools that have got 75% and upwards free school meals, bringing those kids to the farm to give them, time on the farm, running around, looking at the animals, getting to know things. And honestly, it's opened my eyes, because I thought I knew something about what it's like to not know anything about the countryside, but blimey, I didn't. These kids have never seen grass. They're scared of it. They get off the school bus and they're like, oh, there's poo. And they're scared of it, they don't want to sit on it, and it takes them a while to realize they're in a safe place. And then by the end of the 4 hours, they're just feral, they're just running around, they're loving it. Coach chucked off, dumped in a load of nettles, and off they go running, and they have the best time, and we teach them all about the animals and the farm and where their food comes from. So I think there are grassroots movements to try and show exactly what you're calling for, is overcoming some of those barriers. So that's from my experience. I don't know what you think.
No, I agree. There's not much more I can add to that, really, yeah.
I think the difficult thing is and we should come on to this, and there might be some questions on this, I think when anybody starts to talk about privilege in any way, people get their hackles up and go, well, you don't mean that because it's very hard for me here, or whatever, when actually, I think if everybody could just try and have a different perspective on where everybody's coming from, we could all help with that. And I think we need to do that in agriculture.
Yeah.
One thing that, slightly off on a tangent, but when we did the book club last year, Bella Bathurst wrote a brilliant book, and she also spoke about some of the cultural issues in the countryside that she found, which was the pull of the ancestors as well, which is often celebrated in farming, but actually as well can make people stay in a place where maybe they would have preferred to be somewhere else, actually, because of what some dead people previous to them would have thought.
Yeah, the way of life.
Yeah.
The whole kind of farming's a way of life.
The pressure that comes from
There's a dark side to that sentiment.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, oh, farming's not a job, it's a way of life. And that's often held up as this real praise be the way of life. But actually, that is a heavy weight for some.
Yeah, too
You
much
don't,
sometimes.
yeah, don't necessarily want it.
Put your hands up again. I'm going to come down to the front. Just wait for a microphone to come. Brevity is key on questions.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I loved your book. I am a researcher. My interest, so you'll be aware that there's another party going on in Oxford at the moment about farming, and where there are a lot of people from urban backgrounds who are really keen, who are very politically motivated to work on the land and to produce food. And that's all very interesting to me. And what I think there's resonance actually with your work, in my work, is that I'm looking at the class divide in that movement as well. And there is a big class divide in that movement because there's the big difference is there are people that can afford to set up on the land and people that can't afford to set up on the land. And that's all working out at the moment. So my question for both of you, actually, because I think you've got knowledge in this area, so I really genuinely want to know the answer, is there meaningful work on the land for working class people and working class women in particular? You know, and so I've been thinking a lot about having conversations with women who have been trying for 2 decades to set up on the land and have just come against this barrier where at the end of the day they have a conversation with often a man on a quad bike who says, well, I know a couple of blokes who aren't married yet, you know, and that's like the final, that's the bottom line.
Thank you.
Well, I know there's a lot of women who I've met recently who work in forestry, if I can, touch on forestry a little bit. A lot of, people who work for land agents and actual, foresters. A girl used to work for Dad, work in the harvester and the forwarder and stuff, and she's pregnant again now, and she's still doing it. And there's not many foresters in the UK, but I know there's certainly ways to get into that, and they're trying to encourage a lot of people to do that. But it's not easy. I didn't see a way in at all, and I wanted to do something like that, but I didn't see a way in. Farming wasn't, it just wasn't an option, and so farming and forestry. Sorry, I was just like, well, I don't know how to do that either. I could see Dad doing it, but so that's. It never was something for me, but I would like to do something like that if I could possibly one day. And what my next book's going to be about forestry, so I'm going to go help some foresters, I think.
Oh, nice.
To almost get into it that way.
I mean, it's mad, isn't it, when we're talking about is there meaningful work for people, and when we're facing biggest labour shortages ever in agriculture, possibly. There is a labour crisis in our industry. So yes, there's a huge amounts of meaningful work, but is it the work people want to do? And this is the circle we're going round and round and round in. And what do we do? Do we find a way to make that work more attractive? You know, so it's very difficult because there's definitely work in the countryside. There is definitely work on farms. Whether people want to do that work, which brings us into migrant workers and things, I don't know.
I think some of the roots of your question as well, perhaps, and this is all well and good, me as a bloke sat here talking about the role of women, but one of the things in Anna's book, actually, and here we are at Oxford Farming Conference talking about the power of diversity, is that, and Thebe, I don't know if he's in the room, but I've seen him, Thebe is quoted in the book. One of the things that he says in your section, Anna, on diversity is that he doesn't feel like he can work in the countryside and feel normal. He feels like he still can't be himself. You know, and I think I do want to get into some questions, and that might set the scene for some other questions. But if anything, this conference has to talk about some of those issues, which might be the role of women. It might be the role of everybody else as well, and some of the issues that we're facing, because we need more people to be doing more things in agriculture. Question at the back, top left. I know him, Ian.
Ian Tremaine.
Hi, Anna.
Keep it. I can say this to you, Ian. Keep it short.
Question for you, Anna. You talk a wonderful picture about this magnetic pull back to rural Shropshire, but is there anything you miss about the city life that you once lived?
Yes. What is it? Well, I miss my friends. I miss being challenged. The city challenges you every day, challenges your perceptions. And I like to go back on a fairly regular basis. Very easy. Look, Shrewsbury is a very white place to live. And I feel like I've lost diversity from my life. And I think it's dangerous to get too settled in an environment where everyone looks and sounds like you. And I'm really conscious that that could happen because it's not something you do on purpose. It's not something you do, you know, because, you know, you're an intolerant person. It's just humans, the way we live. And if we surround ourselves by people who are just like us, you get lazy. And the city keeps you on your toes with that because you're constantly meeting new people. I lived in a really diverse part of Bristol, in Easton, and I really miss just the diversity of my life there, the people I speak to, the fact that you hear different languages, you see different people, hear different accents. You know, I lived right next to a mosque, to a synagogue, to a temple, Hindu temple, and I think that is really, really valuable. And in the book on in the chapter on diversity, multiculturalism is an urban privilege. And in a rural area, you're not exposed to it. And that is a sadness for rural communities because you're not receiving that influence and challenge in your life that opens your mind, broadens your horizons, and teaches you things. And if we are going to make our industry more inclusive and more diverse, we've got to take the first step. And that does mean putting ourselves in situations that we might find a bit uncomfortable at first. Because I tell you what, I notice it, living in Shrewsbury and then going down to see my friends in Easton, I notice now the diversity that I didn't notice before. You shouldn't, you know, before it was just daily life. So that's what I miss most about the city. And I think it would be brilliant to bring that privilege of the city into more rural communities.
Thank you. We had some more hands. Oh, look at this. It always happens like this. Matt at the back, and then I think it's Sian just at the back there as well. So Matt first and Sian. Please keep them short because we've got 5 or 6 minutes left.
Oh my God, it's gone quickly.
Hi, thank you very much. Matt Stubbings. Of all the issues that your books address, which one, if you were to rewrite your book in, say, 10 years' time, do you think would be most prevalent or most stand out? So if you were to rewrite the book in 10 years' time, of all the issues you address, which one would, I dare say, excite you most or would really stand out?
Brilliant question.
Yeah, it is. tourism for me. I think tourism is. I didn't realise how long tourism had lasted in this country. You know, how long it had been here, basically, and how important it is to rural areas. Obviously, it kind of rules all rural areas now. It's the income for certainly the most of the bulk of it, anyway, and. I think that's changing. I write about second homes and things like that, Airbnbs. You know, in some areas in the UK, it's 1 in 5 houses are second homes or Airbnbs, and there's nowhere for people to live. And I think hopefully in 10 years' time that will have changed. Maybe, I'm not sure, but I think it is changing. But I like to look at things quite positively, and I think things change in cycles. And we were at Wales together, and that little rural village we were at was quite vibrant. The pubs were busy, the community knew each other, everyone was all talking. But the community I'm from, the pubs have shut. You know, there's only 2. Well, there was 4 in the village. There's only 1 really properly going with food and everything. 2 of them have closed, and it's just so sad. You know, and I think things will go in cycles and. Yeah.
Anna, 10 years' time, what one thing out of the book?
Don't need to be 10 years' time. This book is different to this book because the context changed so massively in the space of a year that I had to rewrite this book. So I would say this is a book of lockdown. I wrote the hardback. Well, I wrote the book in lockdown, and made some high-minded commitments that, from now on I'm going to get all of my bread from artisan bakeries, and from now, and all of my vegetables will come in veg boxes, and I don't think I'll ever go to a supermarket ever again. This is a book of the cost of living crisis, where I have to climb down from my high and mighty ivory tower because I can't afford to do that anymore. And so, you know, how the world has gone from that context to that context in such a short space of time is absolutely staggering. So food is, the context of food has changed completely, you know, with input costs on farms, the crises that we've seen in poultry sector, in fruit, in the apples and in pigs especially. I'm very, very concerned about British pig industry. So, yeah.
People should still buy the hardback at the end, though, shouldn't they?
You need to buy both because they're different books.
Right, I'm sorry if you had your hand up. Sian's going to get the final question from the audience, and then I've got a couple to finish, but we can carry on this over drinks. Sian.
Yeah, Sian Davis. So, as a female farmer from Mid Wales myself, well, a question to both of you really, but more so to Anna. What are your thoughts on how we can attract and encourage more young people to work in our rural community? You know, with a growing world population, it's something we're all going to have to face as farmers. So what are your thoughts on that, please?
Have a listen to Farming Today on Radio 4 this morning. It's from Scotland, but highest number of applications ever to do agriculture, I think at SIUC, and the highest proportion of women ever. And they're actually seeing female agriculture applications are outstripping male. So we are definitely seeing a groundswell of women wanting to work in this industry. And do you know what? If I had my time again, and I'm a child of the Tony Blair years, and the whole Blair thing was go to university. Education, education, education. It was rammed down our throats. When I was in school, Llanfyllin High School, you know, if you didn't want to go to university, they weren't interested in you. And the idea of going to agriculture college was just seen as, you know, you need to go to a red brick uni. If somebody had actually encouraged that little spark of interest in agriculture then, my life could be completely different now. But because it was really, you've got to go to uni. So I think in schools, we need to be talking more to young people that you don't have to go down that academic route.
And I think that to know that it's an option, and it's not just farming, and it's not just forest. It's like there's way more in that band. You know, it's
look what we're doing. You know, look at all the careers that are here. You know,
it's more about that. You know, even working as a vet or anything like that, there's just way more in that band than just being a farmer.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that the knowing what options are available at a young age, I think would help.
And it's much trendier now. Like when I was 18, it was really seen as a job for the thickies. So awful, really bad. And they even let farmers' sons who wanted to go straight back to the farm They let them leave school before their GCSEs.
Yeah, they let them play with machinery at the back of our school.
Yeah.
Cars and stuff.
And it was just like, oh, you know, they were kind of pushed to one side. Let's focus our energy on the clever ones. Yeah, but I think that's changed now, and thank goodness it has. And it's just about everyone in this room, in all the careers that you have, to just be talking to young women especially about how varied and diverse this industry really is now.
Right, we're on 7 minutes past 7, so I've got 2 final questions. Thank you so much for your questions. Anna and Rebecca are going for beers afterwards, so you should make sure that we continue the questions there. 2 final questions. What are you reading at the moment? And what's your favourite book?
I'm reading a book which is out in April, which is quite relevant actually. It's called The Borrowed Hills, and it was set during the foot and mouth outbreak in in the Cumbrian Hills, and it's by Scott Preston, and it's very good. I've never read anything like it.
So that's out in April, Borrowed Hills, watch out for that. And what's your favourite book?
I don't know, but I always refer, when I'm feeling, you know, anxious, I always go back to poetry. I don't really like poetry all that much, but I'll go back to a poetry book I read at secondary school because it feels like home.
Perfect. Anna?
At the moment, I am reading Marianne Keyes, Rachel again, because I've just come back from holiday, and it was my holiday read, and I'm not a very fast reader, and it's like that. And does anyone read Marianne Keyes? Oh, she's brilliant. Isn't she just brilliant? Polly? Yeah. It is. She is just such a fantastic writer, and I don't know. When I first went freelance, I used to feel this massive pressure that every night when I go to bed, I should be reading about soil. And I was like, oh, I can't read Marianne Keyes. I need to read Gabe Brown. And do you know what? It didn't make me happy. I want to go to bed and I want to read something that calms my mind.
And tell me about your favourite book.
A Year of Marvellous Ways by Sarah Winman.
Oh, yes. It's a good
It's beautiful and takes me off to a place that's calm and beautiful, and it's very, very nostalgic, and it makes you cry, physically cry, but in a nice way.
She's a great writer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Before we do thank yous and a round of applause, I've got some parish notices from Abby. So, if you'd like to buy a book, come up at the end. If you don't want to buy a book, that's absolutely fine. Please get out of here and go and get a drink, because Will's going to be talking shortly. So, events happening next. Chairman's welcome reception downstairs now until 8 p.m. You will have pre-booked this and will need to show your badges with the yellow square to enter. Everybody's looking down at their badge. Will I be able to get a drink? There is a joint OFC AgriSpec social at All Bar 1 on the High Street from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. So please go along there. Events happening in the morning. I looked on the website and it said that this is led by me, which...
Oh, the run.
Oh, really? Thanks, Will. But the Mike Potter Memorial Run is at 7 tomorrow. Meet at the steps of the exam schools. Don't worry, it's only a short distance and you don't have to be a runner and you don't have to wear running clothes. There's a chapel. Please wear some clothes. There is a chapel service at University College at 7:30, led by Bishop Helen Ann Hartley, the Bishop of Newcastle. I don't know if she's in, but I saw her earlier on. So go there in the morning. Then we're getting there. 3 sponsor breakfast meetings at the exam schools. Breakfast available at 7:45 for 8 a.m. starts. Lantry in room 7, NIAB room 9, Agritech room 11. Registration at the exam rooms from 7:15. Conference starts in the South School at 9:15. And tea and coffee in the North School from 8:15. And the final thing was, keep hold of your badges for tomorrow, because if not, you're knackered. So wear them. Thank you so much to Anna and Rebecca. What I would say, if you want to join Fieldwork Book Club, we read now a book every 2 months, because it was getting a bit heavy. So don't worry, and you don't even have to read the book if you don't want, but please join us. Email fieldworkbookclub@gmail.com or look us up on Twitter, fieldwork_books, and maybe if they have us back next year, we do this all again. So thank you very much, but mainly thank you to Anna and Rebecca.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.